In this screencast, you're going to learn all about the randomized complete block design. In many practical situations, there are nuisance factors that influence the results of an experimental program, but are not what we are attempting to study. As much as possible, we would like to avoid such factors, but on many occasions, that's just not possible. So some examples of these different nuisance factors. First, we might have multiple equipment setups. Maybe experimental runs take a long time, and so we divide the experimental runs into different pieces of equipment. They're supposed to work identically the same, but there's just minor variations in equipment. Maybe there's different personnel, so you have different scientists performing the experiments. Maybe you have nighttime staff and daytime staff, each with their different lab technique. Maybe you have different raw materials. There's batch-to-batch variation among raw materials. Or maybe the temporal conditions of the experiments change. Maybe the ambient air temperature, maybe the humidity, and so on. We're going to work through an example here. You are to test bus tires from 4 manufacturers. So you contact these 4 manufacturers. Each of these manufacturers sends you 5 tires, so you've got a total of 20 tires, but you can only place 4 tires on a bus. So these buses are going to act as blocks. First of all, how many total buses are we going to need in order to perform the experiment? That's right, you will need a total of 5 buses. This is a classic example of blocking when we talk about tire wear evaluation. We're going to take the tires from those 4 manufacturers. We're going to place them on city buses that run different routes. And again, we can't take those 20 tires and put them on a single bus. And so we've got to divvy out those tires onto different blocks or buses. So the bus designation, we have 5 buses. This is known as the blocking factor. One way that we can do this is if we take a look at the buses and the 4 tires on the bus, we could assign all of the tires from manufacturer 1 to bus A, all of tires 2 to bus B, and so on. But I think most of you would agree that this is not the best way to assign tires to the buses. Obviously, this raises the issue that tire wear may vary from bus to bus for various reasons. For example, the distance traveled might be different on these different routes, the character of the bus route, the driver cowboy factor, how wild the driver drives. But we wish to study tire wear, so we must separate the bus factor from the tire factor. We know and have control over the bus allocations, so this is called a blocking factor. A blocking factor has to be something that you can control. Blocking essentially removes some of the error that otherwise would be assigned to the treatments and assigns it to a known nuisance factor or the blocking factor. Importantly, a blocking factor can be thought of as just another treatment, and so we can use two-way ANOVA to analyze the results of a blocking experiment. So a better way to assign tires to these 5 different buses would be randomly. And this is not completely random, this is pseudo-randomly. It's pseudo-random because on each bus, we're going to assign 1 tire from each of the 4 manufacturers. So this might be a suitable way to do this. Again, we haven't completely randomized the tires because each of the blocks has 1 of the 4, but in each block, we've randomized the order of those 4 different tires. Since all tire types are assigned to each bus and each block is big enough to hold all the treatment levels and the assignment of levels can be randomized within the blocks, this is called a randomized complete block design. It is the simplest one to analyze. There are many other blocking designs, by the way, for example, the randomized incomplete block design, but those are beyond the scope of this course. When we collect our data, we have our A treatments, and the treatments are going to be in different rows here. In our case, the treatments are the different tires, and we put them into different blocks. So our columns here represent the different blocks. Again, it's random order of experimentation, but only within the blocks. And just FYI, there are no replicate observations in this design, the one that I'm showing here, but this can be extended to replicates. We can come up with an expanded effects model similar to what we did with two-way ANOVA. We have a treatment effect, which is tau, and we also have a blocking effect, which is beta. The hypothesis test of interest is shown here. The null hypothesis, all of the treatments are equal to 0, meaning there is no difference in tire type. And the alternate hypothesis is there's at least one of the treatments that has a treatment effect that's not equal to 0. Note that in two-way ANOVA, we had a similar hypothesis test on beta, but in this case, because the experimental runs technically aren't randomized, we have assigned tires to each of the blocks. It's not appropriate to perform a hypothesis test on the blocking effect. In order to analyze this, we essentially perform two-way ANOVA where one factor is our factor of interest and the second factor is the blocking factor. We can perform two-way ANOVA. We can compute the sum of squares, the degrees of freedom, the mean squares, and the F statistic. I mentioned this in the previous slide, but because of the fact that we have placed the runs in the different blocks, it's not technically a completely randomized experiment, so it's not appropriate to perform an F test for the blocks here. So let's go ahead and analyze the data. I've got the data in a file called bus tires. So here's the file. The responses in here are the millimeters of tire wear. We have our different treatments, the different tires as rows, and we have our blocks. Now we can go into the data analysis tool for two-factor without replication, ANOVA two-factor without replication. Go ahead and click OK. We can put in our input range, including the labels. So I'm going to select labels. Let's just put this in a new worksheet, and I can click OK. And we take a look at the ANOVA here. I'm just going to change these labels. Rows, that's tires. Columns is going to be blocks, and that's the buses. Now, the one thing I'm going to do here is we have to delete. Again, it's not appropriate because we haven't completely randomized this. I'm just going to delete those statistics. Our conclusion is the p-value for tires is very, very small. So we can accept the alternate hypothesis that tire type does have an effect on the wear. And that's really the only conclusion that we can make. So hopefully you learned a little bit more about randomized complete block design in this screencast. And this can be used for all sorts of different blocking factors.